Hey all, welcome to the By Lives and Stories block. We have some wonderful speakers today that will give us some perspectives on our shared experiences. First up, we have Rosie Wilby, who is an award-winning comedian, author, and podcaster who has appeared many times on BBC Radio 4. Her first book is Monogamy Dead, was longlisted for the Polari Prize and followed a trilogy of solo shows investigating the psychology of love and relationship. Her new book, The Breakup Monologues, published globally by Bloomsbury, is based on her acclaimed podcast of the same name. So go ahead, take it away.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, yes, I'm a comedian based in London. So hello, everybody, wherever you are joining us from around the world. And this, I suppose, is a little bit of fun, my contribution, because I wanted to look at something that came up whilst I was writing my first, well, not my first book, which you've just mentioned, but my new book, The Breakup Monologues. But I'll just show you, the first book you mentioned is Monogamy Dead, was actually inspired when I heard that in many surveys, around 50% of people confess to cheating, however you define that. And that got me thinking that if you are in a monogamous relationship and you're not cheating, you better look closely at your partner, because simple math says it has got to be there. And so I guess what I've been doing for many years now is using humor and comedy and live performance as a way to unpack and make some of the psychology of love accessible and fun for a really broad audience. And so my latest book, The Breakup Monologues, is based on a podcast that I've actually been recording live in London this afternoon. So I've only just joined this conference. And what was really interesting to me was as part of my research, I did one of those experiments where one goes and looks at some erotic imagery and your arousal is measured. I read about these experiments and I was really fascinated to take part in one. And I wrote about my experience in a chapter of the book called Wired for Love. And it was really interesting to me because I came out as a student in the 1990s. And at that time, seemed like it was really important for your label to be political. Things were much more binary. And so I have, for most of my life, defined as a lesbian because most of my romantic and deep and connected relationships have been with women. But interestingly, when I took part in this experiment, I realized that there was something of my identity that had really been erased, because I think my sexual desires are much more broad than that. And in fact, I am bi or pan, and I think we were less embracing of these more fluid and more broad labels back in the 1990s. And in fact, many women who were bi-curious or were feminists defined as political lesbians at the time. Even if they were attracted to men, they sort of wanted to reject men in a kind of feminist statement, which was quite confusing, really, for many of us who were attracted to women. So it was really interesting times, and I suppose I feel that I have held on to the label of being a gay woman when perhaps it's something different that is the real truth about my identity. So I'm embracing perhaps a new coming out and embracing a new fluidity. But what I was keen to do really was to share a little bit from the book, if I may, and just share my experience of taking part in this experiment. So here I am at the campus periphery, being greeted by PhD student Luke, shuffling towards me in a grey hoodie and jeans. He seems the kind of mild-mannered chap I can entrust with the task of measuring whether or not my vagina still has a pulse. Thanks for coming. How was your journey? Fine, thanks. I wonder what kind of small talk one should engage in ahead of a sexy science experiment. So this is the probe, he says, indicating a transparent sealed package containing what I think of as a techno tampon. Wires protruding from it and leading under the partition to the computers on the other side. How does it work? Luke beams, I can tell. Nobody else has asked this. Well, it bounces light against the vaginal walls and reads the illumination that bounces back, so it measures blood flow to the vagina. Wow, fascinating. We'll get you into position, and once I've gone back out and you're ready, you can insert the probe. There's some lube over there on the shelf if you need it. I look over at the sachets and say, when in Rome. I immediately regret this little joke. Right, I'll be talking to you on the intercom, which is also just over there. Just press the button if you need to ask me anything. Normally when I'm using the equipment, I just loosen my trousers and pull them slightly down. You don't need to completely undress. I laugh awkwardly while pondering where exactly Luke is inserting the techno tampon, and then realise there must be an equivalent device for measuring penile arousal. On the chair, there's a bulge under some paper towels. I peek under the kitchen roll to see a pale blue horseshoe-shaped travel pillow. That's the best type of cushion for taking pressure off the probe. If you could sit on it in the chair, Luke says, we need to position you so your eyes are lined up with the camera so that we can measure your pupil dilation. So move slightly to your right and lift your head a little. Yeah, that's right. So I need to keep my head in this position, I say rigidly, sitting as if I'm in the middle of a stomach crunch. Yes, if possible. I shouldn't wear my glasses then. No, not while you're watching the images. But you could pop them on the shelf over there so they're handy if you need them for reading the prompts in between. And then put my head in exactly the same position. Yes. Good grief, this is getting complicated. Right, okay, if you're happy, I'll leave you in here and go around and talk to you on the intercom. I loosen my jeans and tear open the lube. It squirts all over my hands. I have way too much to slather all over the teeny tiny techno tampon. Standing awkwardly with my trousers around my hips, I slide it in. It immediately slides right out and lands in the gusset of my pants. Oh, the intercom crackles into life. How's it going in there? I slide the techno tampon back in and immediately throw myself back down into position on the chair in order to keep hold of it this time. I press the intercom button. Yes, all good. Have you inserted the probe? Yes. Great. I'll just check your pupils are still lined up. Could you move slightly to the right again? Yeah, that's perfect. Okay, I'll play the images now. Soothing clouds float across blue skies in front of my eyes. I settle back. The screen abruptly flicks to a yellowish bedroom. A blonde woman is lying on the floor masturbating next to some discarded headphones and a haphazard pile of magazines. She's being somewhat vocal about pleasuring herself, yet I feel anxious about the acoustic guitar at the periphery of the scene, which is leaning very precariously against a window. Adopting my stomach crunch position, I try to keep my head aligned with the camera. I think I challenge anyone to feel aroused in this situation. After what seems like several interminable minutes, the screen goes black and a question appears. How likely would you be to date this person? What? I consider how likely I would be to date a heterosexual porn actress roughly half my age. I imagine this would be unlikely. However, I'm feeling generous. I give her a 5 out of 10. Then the screen switches to a calming image of what looks like the African savannah. This must be the control clip to return me to a normal arousal state. I hear a familiar voice which immediately transports me back to the innocence of my nerdy, nature-loving childhood. As the seasons change and the rain comes, the grasses spring up once again. Blimmin' heck, it's David Attenborough. Before I get too engrossed in the fast-motion shots of greenery emerging from desert plains, my visual panorama alters. This time a man is lying back on a leather sofa, fondling his penis. At least that's a wipeable surface, I think. Mind you, there's something about this man with his dark, playful eyes and firm stomach that connects with me. Curious, I lean in a little. Seeing a naked man feels like a novelty. I can't think when it was. It must have been that time. Well, anyway, it's been a long time ago. The clip gets cut off just as he was getting into it. I can't help but feel disappointed. How likely would you be to date this person? Well, this is complicated because I actually felt more interested in looking at him because I could see his face and he was looking at the camera. And yet I'm a lesbian, or at least I thought so. So surely I'd be less likely to go out with a man. I don't want to get caught out and be ejected from the experiment, which had advertised for lesbian-only participants. What if they think I'm a rogue heterosexual woman masquerading as a lesbian? Quite what any 40-something straight woman would be doing, bunking off work and pretending to be gay just to get paid £90 for watching dimly lit erotica in physically uncomfortable conditions. I don't know. I can get paid double that for standing on stage being funny. This weird procedure already feels like it's taking hours, not helped by my procrastination. I give him 4 out of 10. During the next David Attenborough clip, I remember a chapter from the book, What Do Women Want? The author, a New York Times journalist called Daniel Bergner, interviews a female scientist who has conducted similar experiments over a number of years with largely heterosexual participants, where men tend to have a strong correlation between what they are physically turned on by and what they say they're turned on by. Women often have a complete disconnect between the two. Decades of social conditioning prompt us to judge ourselves, play down our private animal instincts, and assume that our arousal must surely be narrowly aligned with our publicly stated sexual preferences. I have done exactly that. However, Luke's hypothesis laid out in the article I'd originally responded to is that lesbians might have a more masculine specificity of desire. He's anticipating that I'll be turned on by women and women alone. Yet, as the images unendingly alternate between women and men, on a bed, on a chair, leaning against a wall, kneeling on a tasteful rug, I feel equally intrigued by all of it. That's the end of this part of the experiment. Okay. I go back into the larger room to answer some questions about topics including depression, my views on gender identity, and memories of childhood. At least it's multiple choice. You can always guess at those. I finished. Great. The next thing we need to do is scan both of your hands. Oh, that's interesting. I've heard something about finger lengths being related to sexual orientation. Well, the theory is that greater exposure to testosterone in the womb generally results in an extreme difference between the lengths of the ring and index fingers. Sometimes the ring finger is as long as the middle finger, and often those women with long ring fingers define as lesbian. I inspect my own hands. My ring and index fingers are identical lengths, yet another way in which I'm a bad lesbian. When we emailed to book the appointment, you mentioned I could look at my results, I say to Luke. Yes, that's fine. We'll look at your arousal graphs now. Luke opens up a graph on his computer. The waveform looks tiny. My fluctuations in excitement barely registering on the scale. We'll just zoom in a bit. Oh yes, look. This bit corresponds to the first clip of a woman. And this peak here corresponds to probably one of the other women. She's been very popular. Oh, that's actually one of the men. I quite liked him. You did, although on average, I think the arousal is just slightly higher during the female clips. And what about during David Attenborough, I ask. Oh, we don't measure during the control clip. Oh, that's a shame. I recorded this data with a pair of twins, both lesbians, Luke proffers, opening up more graphs. I gulp slightly as I observe the Himalayan peaks of desire achieved by this horny duo. This is quite different to my feeble undulations. No need to zoom in now. This was during the clip of the woman on the bed, says Luke, almost proudly indicating a particular high. Oh yes, how old were these twins? 26. Fair enough. When I was in my 20s, I was probably on a much shorter sexual fuse, readier to get rapidly hot and bothered at random raunchy images. The more interesting point is that the younger women's results sort of do support Luke's hypothesis. There is a marked difference between the response to watching either women or men. Whereas I have long suspected maybe I am bisexual. I prefer my long-term, deep, committed emotional relationships to be with women. And for that reason, I felt that the term lesbian had always been the most honest label for me to adopt. But in terms of short-term sexual desires, I know I'm a lot more fluid than my gold star lesbian friends. Taking part in this experiment has helped me come to terms with that. When I get home, I say to my girlfriend, I think I'm a bit turned on by cock. Yeah, me too, she says. I mean, not a real cock with an actual man attached, just a hypothetical one, just a pretend one. It's all good, baby, she says. We both had boyfriends. And in that moment, I realised that girlfriend is a keeper. She just gets it and gets me. In the old days, I'd have whisked her off to bed, but I have a flashback to the sticky lube and the techno tampon gathering dust in the crotch of my knickers. I head for the shower. So that's a little extracts from the Breakup Monologues, which I should add was inspired when I got dumped by email, but did feel much better once I'd corrected my ex's spelling. And it's just a bit of fun, really. But I think what I'm interested in maybe discussing with people, if they had any questions, is how we maybe go about using humour and personal memoir to demystify some of the psychology of love and how we kind of think about identity and sexuality and some of the real psychology and science behind that, and to make it really fun and accessible. And that's what I've been trying to do in my live shows and books and work. Thank you.
Awesome. That is great. Some of us have been at this conference for a few hours now, and it's so energetic, and thanks for picking us up. For folks in the audience, if you have questions for Rosie Wilby, I think we might be able to have time for a question or two right now. Let's see if there are any thoughts at the moment. So like I said, quiet crowd, tough crowd. It happens. Okay, let's move on to our next speaker. K. Bird is a multiracial era writer. Their writing has appeared in print and online, and she has essays forthcoming in the Rumpus and Cat Party. They live on land that belongs to the peoples of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. So please, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you so much to the organizers of this event. Thank you to my fellow panelists. Rosie, that was incredibly entertaining. Thank you. And thanks to all the attendees for making time on a Saturday for this conference. My name is K. Bird, and I'm going to read excerpts from my essay, I Can't Tell, which is forthcoming in the Rumpus. I've condensed some of the passages for time, and I've written some interstitial sentences to help me navigate this reading. Otherwise, these are all in the essay. Beyond that, the only things that you need to know are Situ is the Arabic word for your father's mother. Muskogee is the name of the native nation that my maternal ancestors are from. And toward the end of the reading, I'm going to repeat 2 homophobic slurs I've been called, so I apologize for that in advance. I can't tell. It's February 1991. And I can't tell you where the Middle East is on a map, but my family eats Syrian bread with every meal. I can't tell you the difference between Syrian bread and pita, but I know they're not the same. My Situ speaks Arabic, or more specifically swears in Arabic. She won't tell me what it means in English, but she does translate majnoon, which means crazy, and which she calls me and my brother every chance she gets. I can't tell you if she ever considers why my brother and I act a little off sometimes, but I share a bedroom with her, and my brother shares a room with my father, and my uncles get their own rooms, one in the attic and one in a regular bedroom. That's 6 of us in one house. There's not enough house for any of us to get a second's piece. We don't say I love you. Instead, Situ says majnoon. She says other things too, of course. Every morning she asks if I've washed my face, and I lie and say yes. And she tells me it doesn't look it. And after I take a bath at night, she hugs me and says I smell pretty, which doesn't mean much because she basically mainlines packs of Pall Malls and coffee. After she switches to Lucky Strikes when I'm in middle school, I lose my ability to know what's true. But it's hard for me to tell her so. It's hard for me to understand why she says what she says, why she does what she does. Then again, there have always been things I couldn't understand. Toward the top of my list, the day my math teacher wheels a television into our classroom and turns it on without explanation. He's already chosen the channel, CNN, and his eagerness erupts while we watch. On the screen, US soldiers wear brown camouflage and march in tight formations across a field of sand. Their guns touch the edges of the screen, end to end. I don't understand why we're watching TV at school, though our teacher will later mention he's a veteran and explain that this event, this thing he calls the Gulf War, is the first with live feed from the front lines. Admittedly, I'm not sure I would have cared even if I had understood. I had other concerns. Watching those soldiers, I felt exposed. I wasn't afraid America would be attacked. I didn't assume we'd suffer any consequence for invading someone else's country. In that moment, I thought only of myself. Please don't let anyone notice I'm Middle Eastern. I was in 4th grade. I had turned 9 the previous September. 10.5 years later, my brother calls me on my birthday. Whatever you do, don't turn on the TV. It's barely 9 a.m. I hang up and go back to sleep. When I get up later, I remember my brother's warning. I don't have cable and can't afford the internet, so I turn on the radio. Winding the dial to the lowest FM station, I can pick up the audio for ABC. The broadcast is somber. Smoke is streaming from the Pentagon. I sit in my living room and hold my own hands, aware that I'm alone. My roommate is out of town, and the descriptions continue. An organized terrorist attack. I look toward the window. The sun-filled street belies the day's events. My mind sets forth dramatic upheavals, tanks in the streets, skyscrapers fainting, men who looked like me and my family making demands I don't understand. In the months that followed my 20th birthday, reporters discussed the last time the World Trade Center had come under attack. 1993, Ramzi Youssef, another Al-Qaeda terrorist. Youssef was a Pakistani from Kuwait. I can't find Pakistan or Kuwait on a map, but another Al-Qaeda terrorist, anyone can tell what that means. Another Middle Easterner. Syrian, really? What's your last name? I can't tell if it's worthwhile to recount the whole thing at a party. Situ's maiden name is Abraham, mangled when her father came through Ellis Island at the end of the 1890s. In Syria, her last name was Webhe. But since her father's first name was Ibrahim, the Ellis Island agents picked up Abraham and deemed that close enough. But extending this new name back to Amar, where Ibrahim still lived, he becomes Ibrahim Abraham. And if that's not enough to make the story too strange to tell, way back in the 18th century, before Ibrahim was born, he had an ancestor, Webhe, whose name I find fascinating in the same way I think novels from the middle of the 20th century are fascinating. For example, the character from Catch-22, whose name becomes Major. Catch-22, another war story. But suddenly my family feels literary. Yet that's not what my new white acquaintance at this party wants to know. I can't tell what they're expecting, so I give them the last name I was born with. And of course, they redouble their efforts. Syrian, really? Tell me what percentage. I get similar demands for percentages when I talk about my sexuality or gender. Bisexual, like half gay, half straight. Yeah, yep, right down the middle, 50-50, 100% of the time. Except when it's 60-40, or 75-25, or 10 times 10. Or when it falls to 0 after decades of questions force me to wonder how I could still be a person at all. I can't tell you how many times I've wondered how to be a person that other people recognize without question. Just like I can't tell you the name for my gender, there's really not a word for it. I've never met the standards to be a woman or a man, not girlish enough to be femme or masc enough to be butch. My gender doesn't neatly align with any label in any language I know. For so long, the terms in Arabic for homosexuality or queerness were slurs. The Arabic words for sodomite and abnormal were common parlance to describe any and all homosexual acts and people. Arab activists have worked to change that, but most of the terms they've coined are new, and it takes time, and they face backlash. So it goes in the United States too. Nicknames like the alphabet mafia replace LGBTQ+. Bisexuality is turned into a joke about threesomes, unicorns, mirages, and moon phases. Trans people are told we can't expect people to understand new pronouns. P.S. Singular they is older than plural you. And yes, the word queer has been reclaimed in academic circles, but most people aren't academics. So while some people are strong enough to take back words like fag or dyke to describe themselves, it still hurts when strangers, family members, and friends have used either word to describe me. So it goes in Arabic-speaking countries. The new words don't always fit, and the old ones are ready-made, right there at hand when someone wants to try to strike a nerve. No wonder it took me so long to develop the muscle to talk about myself. I can't tell you who I am. I also can't tell you how many times I've tried to tell someone anyway. The ways I've divided myself into parts in order to be understood. Syrian, Muskogee, Polish, Hungarian, multiracial, mixed, Arab, Arab American, feminine, masculine, androgynous, genderqueer, gender nonconforming, queer, bisexual, gay, straight. And then the things I've been called. And then the things I've called myself. I can't tell you how many times. I can't tell you how. I can't tell you. I can't tell. But when it comes to telling myself, here's the hardest of hard truths. I'm all of these moments, the sum of these parts, all the labels, all the names I've been called, every mistake, every misstep, every misunderstanding. Every time somebody mangled my heritage, every time I've wished my grandmother had taught me Arabic, every time I've avoided scrutiny. All of it. It's all me. Thank you.
Oh, that's excellent. And thank you for opening up to us and sharing that part of your life. Admittedly, I'm checking in on the third speaker, but in the meantime, if others have questions for Kike Bird, please let them know.
Oh, Tim, that's really kind. Thank you. You can go to my website, which is kikbird.com, and there's a part that says make contact. Email me and I can send you links. I changed my name legally last year, and basically I have a lot of publications under my former name, so I can send you those. Also, if there aren't other questions, Rosie, I have questions for you.
Oh yeah, okay, great. Yeah, I loved your writing, so thank you for sharing.
Thank you, that's really kind. I was just wondering basically what the reception has been for you, because I have so many friends who identify as bisexual, as pansexual, as lesbian, as gay, as queer, right? So when you're writing nonfiction and you say, okay, for a long time you identified as lesbian, but then of course you're concerned about having to come out again, right? Which bisexuals have to do all the time. But like, how did that go? And then you're like, by the way, it's not just a change for me. I'm also going to be writing about this and you're gonna have feelings about it. Like, how did that go?
I think our relationships and how we frame them and how we're talking to them about people, to people, are in a constant state of flux anyway. I think as queer people broadly within the LGBTQ plus community, I think we're always changing who we come out to and how we come out to them and how we frame that in different contexts, whether it's work or social or professional. So yeah, I think yeah, I have some kind of really old school lesbian friends who are like, no, you don't fancy men, you know, what are you talking about? You know, and there's definitely some of that. But, you know, I'm now married to my girlfriend, as she is in the book. We got married. And so I think we're both sort of, I mean, I don't know if she would even use the label lesbian particularly, but we've generally had relationships with women. But I think we both realized that our attraction and the sort of template of our attraction is much broader than that. And yeah, we're probably really essentially bi or pan, but we're in a monogamous relationship as two women. So, you know, there's an interesting tension, isn't there, between how you sort of define yourself and how culturally you're seen and defined by the relationship that you're in, because we're all assumed to be in a sort of traditional monogamous relationship, even if it's, you know, now that we have same-sex marriage, you know, it's still assumed that that relationship sort of defines you. You know, it's really interesting. You know, and in the UK, it's been interesting looking at how things have changed now that we can get married as two women. I was back in the 1990s as a student, I was sort of protesting, and we did a same-sex wedding demo outside the chapel where I was a student, and it was on Valentine's Day, and we're shouting through megaphones going, love is not a crime. And I think we thought it was pure science fiction that two women or two men would be able to get married. And I guess that's why at that time it seemed important to come out, you know, as gay, as a lesbian or a gay man, to sort of push that equality agenda, because I suppose there was a fear that if you said you were bisexual, that, you know, the friends who kind of wanted you to just fit in would say, oh, well, you know, if you fancy women and men, then you could just marry a man, you know. Do you know what I mean? The sort of ridiculous things that people say. So I guess there was a sort of feeling at that time that it was important as a political statement to keep things more binary, to sort of be able to campaign for equality in a way that wasn't sort of muddied by those ridiculous assumptions that people make if you're bisexual, that somehow you've got choices. But, you know, sometimes we can't quite control who we fall in love with, can we? It's not always neat. We're human beings and we're messy and complex.
I think I'm going to have to just in case interject here. We were able to get our third speaker in after all. So let me go ahead and introduce her. Reverend Dawn Bennett serves as the development pastor at the Table in Nashville, Tennessee, over in the United States. The Table centers on lived experiences of LGBT plus people. Her mission in ministry is to bring hope and healing to LGBTQ plus people of faith while providing advocacy and education to the larger public sector in an effort to deter religious discrimination and spiritual harm. So if you're ready, Pastor Dawn, go for it.
I'm going to try and be ready. I actually am going to attempt to share my screen, but this is ironic because I'm actually dialing in from my phone. So we're going to see how well we can do. Am I still with you?
We only see your profile picture at the moment.
Okay. All right. Well, I am going to forego any amount of humility and grace, because really what I need for everyone to hear is the information. So I deeply apologize that I can't seem to get the screen to share, but I'm going to at least read the presentation. So welcome and thank you for joining me today. In the Deep South region of the United States, religion is cultural. And one would be hard pressed to find a nook or a cranny where the topic of religion, and more predominantly Jesus, is left out of the conversation. All forms of xenophobia, transphobia, and homophobia are present here. And sadly, they are in abundant supply from our top elected officials all the way to our tiny little towns. And we use phrases like, bless your heart, and we sugarcoat almost everything, often while spewing religious hate and speech in disguise. So today's presentation is just a short glimpse of how bisexual and queer and other LGBTQ folks are taking back Sunday. This is my guide, which I'm going to try to put in the chat later. And I impart it to you as a gift or a tool to help you locate your beloved self in the presence of spiritual community. And why? Because you are beloved, and you need to hear that. My name is Reverend Dawn Bennett. Most folks just call me Pastor Dawn. I am an out bisexual female pastor living in the Deep South. I'm an ordained minister of Word and Sacrament in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, commonly known as the ELCA. And I proudly serve in the Southeastern Synod under Bishop Kevin Strickland. A little bit closer to home, I serve as the pastor developer at The Table in Nashville, Tennessee, which is squarely situated in the Deep South region of the United States. Tennessee is known by many names, one of which is the slate of hate, and we earn that, sadly. To address this travesty, today's presentation is intended to liberate you from spiritual harm that may be done to you or a loved one in the name of God, but not by God, because, beloved, God is the original author of the Hippocratic Oath. So I invite you to connect with us at thetable-nashville.org, or you can find me online through social platforms. And my hope and prayer for you today is that you are empowered to reclaim the ways in which you too live and move and have your being as a beloved child of God. Religious trauma permeates not only culture in the Deep South, but culture everywhere. Two questions that every human wants to know at some point in their lives is, how did I get here and where am I going when I'm done? Answers to these questions play a major role in our whole person wellness. And today we address it from the bisexual experience. Bisexual people make up the largest sector of LGBTQ+ folks, and yet we experience erasure beyond measure, quite literally, because erasure is most effective when data, lived experiences, pictures, history, academia, and theological writings are fashioned in such a way that we are left out of the story or we're absorbed into the story of another. And one of the ways that I use my pastoral authority to build a more affirming global church is to educate folks inside and outside religious lines on the dangerous impact that religious trauma and spiritual harm do to a person's life, because none of us lives in a vacuum. Many of us are parents, we're siblings, we are adult children of still living parents. We hold positions of authority, we are teachers and community leaders. We volunteer our time and our resources to build an ever diverse future for the next generation. And we do this because of our great love. We have gone on, many have gone on before us and many will come after us, but for this season, in this time and space, it is up to us to be seen, to be known, and to be heard. And there is a graphic and it has all kinds of words on it: shame and guilt and fear and God and religion and harm and family, all things like that that we've heard. And the graphic represents but a mere portion of the harm that our soul is inflicted by because of religious bigotry. And when harms become ailments, we become less than who God created us to be. And I believe that God gets a bad rap, because in scripture, the only thing that God has ever said about us is that we are created in the image of everything that is beautiful and holy. And no matter when we came out, or even if we're not out yet, we know who we are deep inside. And it may not be safe for us to voice it, but it doesn't erase it. Because make no mistake, beloved, however it is that you perceive or understand God, know that you are created with purpose, with a plan, and that you are beautiful and holy just as you are. Scripture is clear. We are created for love, by love, and that through the partnership and companionship given to us by Jesus, we are to pass along this love to the next generation. At the table, which is where I pastor, we work hard to understand the ways in which we can take back our Sunday, or whatever day you set apart to celebrate God and yourself as all things holy. It is our work to protect the soul at all cost. At the table, we achieve spiritual resilience by rebuilding our faith on the cornerstone of 3 R's. We explore scripture to dispel myths and lies and toxic theology. We engage in creative wonderings and we ask hard questions. We lean in when it's hard to understand the text, and we lean in even a little bit farther when we don't easily find ourselves located, because Jesus was the ultimate teacher. He stood for justice, he stood for mercy, and he stood for the passionate and inexhaustible love that the Creator has for every person. So the first R is reframing. It is our first tool. We reframe new narratives of harmful stories and illustrations that have been extrapolated and used as weapons. There's a scant number of single verses in scripture that have become global weapons against us. And the work of spiritual resilience is to zoom out, to read an entire chapter or a book even, to consider the larger meaning. Zooming out becomes a tool to explore the deeper meanings of our being and belonging in the midst of the story that Jesus was telling in real time. It's incumbent upon us to read scripture contextually with a 21st century lens. We can read multiple translations of the same passage to glean a more well-rounded understanding. We can pick up on hints and cues that help us understand where Jesus may have been coming from when he was speaking his instruction. We then set out to reform how these narratives impact our daily lives. We actively challenge the old negative tapes that run through our head. Different denominations have inflicted varying amounts of religious harm, and so therefore it's delicate work to align oneself with like-minded people and journey to that tender but often tumultuous minefield of spiritual harm. We do this work individually and collectively. We outright refute lies that bring us harm. We envision what our life could be like with a healthy narrative of how God is at work in our lives and surroundings. And finally, with a new narrative and some courageous new wonderings, we form bold new actions and new rituals that build within us renewed faith. We take deliberate action to speak out, to speak up, and to advocate for ourselves, for our children, and for the larger society. Perhaps new actions look like taking a break from church, or perhaps new actions look like rolling the dice and telling yourself it really could be different this time, that God does love me just the way I am. Because from my lips to your ears, beloved, you are beautiful and holy just as you are. It is possible to reclaim a healthy faith life. In Lutheran tradition, we believe that God is present in everything, everywhere, from the microcosm through humanity and all the way into the universe and beyond. And with that in mind, some tools of resilience for you might be to situate yourself in the earthly elements. In water, you can go to the beach or a lake if it's near you. You can sit around a campfire or a fire pit in someone's backyard and just allow that warm glow to overcome you and think of God while you stare into the flames. You could imagine yourself in a field of wildflowers in the midst of all that is bright and beautiful, with all creatures great and small. Or maybe you blow like the refreshing wind on a gusty fall day. This is you. God loves you enough to be with you and to restore you to whole person wellness. Perhaps you locate yourself at the communion rail, a place where you were told you were unwelcome. You can refute those lies and choose to remember Jesus in all things. You are restored and held and loved beyond measure there. And music might be, or prayer might be, your form of restoration. You can let it fill you to the brim with a new sense of love and acceptance. At the table, we do this through our sending prayer. Every week, just prior to the benediction, we stand together with open arms and we declare our belovedness. So as I close our time, I invite you, wherever you are today, to join me in declaring life over yourself as a beautiful and holy bisexual person. I invite you to copy this prayer. I'll put it in the chat, and to say it with me now, which you can't, so I'll say it on behalf of all of us. And just carry it deep within you, and as you practice resilience and take back your Sunday. And our sending prayer goes like this: we are a blessing, we are not a burden. The world is a kinder and more wonderful place because we are in it. We are loved by God and cherished for who we are in our Creator's eyes. We go with confidence, knowing that we are a unique and precious creation. And so now may the God of all goodness, grace, and unconditional love follow you all the days of your life. Be well.
Thank you for presenting all that in a very impromptu setting. Imagine of all, you're just so used to thinking about dealing with challenges. We have about 5 minutes for questions, if anybody has questions for Pastor Dawn. I guess I'll just start with the obvious. Are there any like deeper concerns about taking up these stances in the quote unquote deep South?
Actually, yes, I am as we speak. I just put my website in the chat, and I'm gonna post the presentation there when I get a second. Physically, it is dangerous to be an out LGBTQ person here. Physically dangerous. And I live in Nashville, which is the center, the epicenter of the state. And so this term, we have a progressive mayor. And so as long as you're in Davidson County, you're relatively safe. But we have a governor who is very conservative and is on record as signing massive amounts of LGBTQ legislation, anti-legislation into our legislature. And it's going to get worse this year, actually. Most recently, our premier hospital, that is a learning hospital and does the major work of healthcare service to LGBTQ persons through our gender clinic. They were just attacked yesterday, and the governor has signed on to the idea of launching an investigation on Vanderbilt University Medical Center, which is absolutely preposterous. So, you know, and being an out clergy person, I can tell you that I am rarely on the favorable side of public people here. And for me, all that does is up the ante as to why this work is important, because literally we have suicidality is too much of an option here, because care providers, medical, mental, spiritual care providers, there's legislation to begin charging us criminally for serving LGBTQ plus people. Parents are at risk of being charged with child neglect and child abuse. So that's next level, you know. Discrimination is one thing, homophobia, transphobia, that's one thing, but when you start writing it into the legislation that governs the state, it becomes next level dangerous. So it's a difficult time to be out, really, but at the same time, there's no better time, right? When you can stand and be heard and be seen, and stand up for what you believe in.
Thank you.
So.
You were definitely seen. And
Yeah.
this is an international group, so we might not be able to assist you directly. So let me phrase it this way. What can we be doing in our lives to assist local groups like yourselves?
Well, you know, I stream our services every Sunday night, and I did not plan to be global. But because of COVID, we've got, you know, got 24 or 5 states in the US and 4 or 5 countries that I just didn't anticipate. So we are serving folks in the UK and folks in Scotland. I've got folks in Australia. And I think the most important thing is if you are a person who practices your faith out loud, do that. But, you know, I always caution people to do it safely, because physical safety is paramount. And if it's not safe for you to be out in your community, in your church, in your denomination, in your faith tradition, it's definitely not safe to be Muslim and queer. It's not safe to be Christian and queer. It's, you know, but the important thing is that if you are a person of faith, just understand that faith is inbred in who we are as people. It's part of what makes us tick. And so to just lean into those areas where you want to get to know yourself as a created being with purpose and innate worth and value, because we hear all too often that we don't have that, but we do have that. And I haven't found a sacred text yet in Eastern or Western tradition that refutes that we are innately worthy and valuable.
A couple of things. I'm actually going to step off to prepare for the next talk, but there is a private message, so I do want to leave you all with that question, and then I'll just have you answer it while I step away. Someone wanted to ask you, but sent me a deep private message. How did you reconcile your identity with your faith in the Deep South in the United States? They're asking as a Christian bi person themselves. And also from me, nice meeting you all, and I'll head on out.
I'll be happy to answer that. How did I reconcile it? You know, I have 2 gay brothers, a lesbian sister, and an adult transgender son. I read straight. People look at me and I have passing privilege, and I don't take that lightly. How I reconciled it is I've never not felt like God didn't love me. And from as long as I can remember, I was raised in the Catholic tradition. And as long as I can remember, anybody who told me different, I just didn't believe. Throughout my life, honestly, there have been times when I could not speak about it publicly. But today, and for a couple decades now, I serve in a tradition that the Evangelical Lutheran Church in the United States anyway is leading the progression of church. We do ordain LGBTQ people, and so you know, it has been confirmed to me by clergy leadership that I have a place to serve in the church. And as a bisexual person, I've never had difficulty believing that God loved me. I did have difficulty believing that I didn't have to choose. And I own that. And in a place like the Deep South, that's probably, you know, ignorance is rampant here, and people make all kinds of ridiculous claims that we've all heard, you know, just pick a side, or, you know, it must be great to have twice the sex, or, you know, how does it work with you and God? And all of those things, I just respond by saying, you know, God and I are just fine. And clearly, because of the reality that I have achieved public pastorate, the church is behind me. You know, now that's not to say that every single church, every single pastor, every single congregation is affirming of me. That's not true. And we all know that, right? But I think my unwillingness to believe anything other than God has a plan and a purpose for my life. I refuse to believe anything different. And it does set me apart sometimes, but I had to just decide that whether I practice my faith publicly or privately, that's a truth. And so thank you for asking that question. I appreciate that question. It's not easy. I own that too. You know, we all know if we're people of faith, we are far too easily tempted to buy the lies. But what I tell everybody, my congregants, my family, people, anybody in earshot, if people say terrible things to you in the name of God, that is not the same as God saying them. The only thing God has ever said is that we are created in the image of God, however it is we understand that. So that's your permission slip to disregard what another human being says to you. The reality is that God says you're wonderful, and the invitation is for you to believe it. Yeah. Thank you for that question.
So I know that we only have 5 minutes left, and I think that Derek has stepped away to do the next one. It's hard for me to be in a Zoom setting where everybody has their cameras off and not be reminded of teaching. But thank you to all of you for making time to be here today. I know that there are more presentations that are coming at 3 o'clock. Let me look really quickly. The next panel, one of them is how to write gay characters and not get fired. And then there is a keynote with Robin Oakes at 4. So plenty of good stuff that's coming up. And thank you to Reverend Bennett and to Rosie for being here.
And to you.
Thank you as well.
Thank you. Thank you, friends.